Welcome to Eggs and Issues, a monthly business forum presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce, bringing timely economic discussion to the region for nearly 40 years. Thank you to our sponsors and partners. Presenting sponsors: Central Maine Power and MEMIC. Cooperating sponsor: Martins Point. Reception sponsors: Clark Insurance, KeyBank, and Preddy Flaherty. Community Corner sponsor: Goral Palmer. Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs sponsor: AAA Northern New England. Parking sponsor: Impeople Credit Union. Photography sponsor: Wooler and Company. Media partners: radio sponsor: WGAN. Print sponsor: Maine Trust for Local News. TV sponsor: WMTW, Maine's CW. Business news sponsor: Maine Biz. Our venue partner: University of Southern Maine. And thank you to our special community partners: Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Kennebec Savings Bank, MEMIC, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, Southern Maine Community College, and the University of Southern Maine. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber President, Rob Atkinson.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming to this issue of Eggs and Issues. We're so glad you can join us. This is the second session of our Fall Eggs and Issues semester, Portland, a 21st Century City. As you just heard, and I love that, my name is Rob Atkinson. I'm Director of Marketing and Public Relations at MEMIC, and I'm also honored to serve as the volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. This morning's discussion, seriously, another hotel? Why hotels are key to Portland's success goes behind the headlines to explore why hotel development in Portland continues to surge even as other markets cool. Our panel of industry leaders will unpack what the growth means for our economy, our workforce, and the city's future, from the historic preservation to job creation. Now, before I invite our panelists to the stage, I want to take a moment to address a referendum question that Portland voters will see on the ballot this November. The question asks whether Portland's minimum wage should be increased from the current $15.50 per hour to $19 per hour. Now, it's important that we understand the context of this referendum. Portland already has one of the highest minimum wages in the region, and it's index deflation, meaning it rises automatically each year. If this referendum passes, Portland would have a higher minimum wage than cities like Boston, New York City, and Washington, D.C. Think about that. A nearly 30% increase in labor costs would be a major shock to small businesses and nonprofits, especially in today's uncertain economic times. For organizations that rely on fixed state reimbursements like child care providers, health care centers, and social service agencies, this change could be devastating. They simply can't raise prices to offset the higher wages. In many cases, it would force service reductions, relocations, or even closures, which is directly impacting the very communities this policy is intended to help. Now, we recognize that this effort is part driven by the real and growing cost of living in Portland, something no one disputes. But raising the minimum wage alone doesn't address the root causes, issues with housing, childcare, and transit. So that's why we're encouraging you to do your research, and we hope that you'll vote no on this referendum in November. Now I want to thank our sponsors of Eggs and Issues who have returned this year to make this event possible for the entire season. Without our sponsors' support of Eggs and Issues, the Chamber could not deliver the high-quality speakers, panels, and presentations you've come to expect, so thank you very much. You may have noticed outside our radio sponsor, WGAN, is holding their annual Make 12 Hours Count Radiothon to benefit veterans through an organization called Veterans Forward. Please stop by their table on the way out if you haven't done so already. 100% of your donation provides emergency financial support for veterans here in Maine. Now I'd like to extend a very sincere thank you to our special community partners. These businesses and organizations support not just Eggs and Issues, but nearly 70 events of the Portland's Regional Chamber of Commerce produces throughout the year. So please, a round of applause for our generous sponsors and partners. A quick reminder, complimentary parking is available for all Eggs and Issues events. Just validate with promo code EGGS2526, and if you need help, find someone from the Chamber. This month's Community Corner is the Jewish Community Alliance of Southern Maine. The Jewish Community Alliance of Southern Maine actively works to make the world a better place, in addition to acting as a vibrant hub for Jewish life in the community and supporting Jews around the world. They also work to improve the broader Portland community, both through their own programs and partnering with other agencies. Two key programs they run are the Community Diaper Bank, which provides diapers, wipes, and menstrual products to those in need throughout Southern Maine, and the Winter Warmth Drive, which provides quality snow boots to children in Portland area schools. I believe we have some members of the Jewish Community Alliance in the audience. If you would please stand now and be recognized. Thank you. Thank you for your important work. You are making a difference. Our Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs program gives local students free access to Eggs and Issues. So for students in the room with us today, thank you too for joining us. Okay, now on to today's program. At the Chamber, one of the questions we hear again and again from our members is, how can Portland still be building more hotels? You probably have heard it on the streets yourselves. Several new projects are underway, and we know more are planned. At the same time, these hotels continue to command some of the highest room rates in New England. And that's raised important questions. Why is this market still so strong? What does this wave of development mean for our city? And how do hotels fit into Portland's broader story? So alongside hotel growth, we're also wrestling with some other big issues: the urgent need for more housing and the desire to diversify our economy beyond tourism. Today's conversation is about putting those pieces together, understanding why hotel investment keeps coming, and what it brings to Portland in terms of jobs, tax base, and long-term prosperity. We're fortunate to have three leaders with us today who know this industry inside and out. John Schultzel, Chief Growth Officer at Olympia Hospitality, Jim Brady, co-founder and president of Fathom Companies, and Matt Ahrens, principal at the Ahrens Company. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Well, welcome. Thank you all for coming today. John, we want to start with you. Hotels don't exist in isolation. They're part of a larger tourism ecosystem, if you will. You've served as chair of the Visit Portland's board, an organization that is essential in telling the full story of why hotels matter more than ever. Could you talk about the role tourism plays in Portland's economy and how hotel activity supports restaurants, shops, the arts, and many local vendors?
I think, admittedly, I should first ask you how much time we have. We could talk about this stuff for a super long time. And just for context, I moved here in 2001, and the first person I called when I moved to Maine was my friend in school, Matt Ahrens, who introduced me to Jim Brady. And so I've had the pleasure of sort of collaborating and working with these two gentlemen for a super long time. And obviously, we're all advocates of tourism and hospitality in general. I got into it simply because hospitality is, for me, one of the funnest businesses there is. It's highly engaging. It's highly human. And it's permanent. People have been traveling since the time of Beowulf, and hopefully they'll continue to travel well beyond that. When we think about impact, as a hotelier, I sort of think of it in sort of two buckets. One is sort of the revenue bucket, which is the people who are coming to visit, and what do they do, and where do their spending go? And then the expense side, which is we take in that revenue, but we deploy that revenue in terms of our expenditures outward. I think in general, a lot of us intuitively understand the value of tourism in terms of what visitors bring to the Portland, Maine economy. This is everything from Uber rides to restaurant and retail, excursions, but also gas stations and groceries. It's not just what people do when they're on vacation. A lot of the people who count as visitors or who get lumped into the bucket of tourism aren't just people on vacation, even though we live in vacation land, but they're people visiting other businesses, they're people going to Maine Med, and so on and so forth. But the flip side of the coin is that we also spend a lot of money locally as hoteliers. Our number one expense in any hotel is labor and payroll. So we have almost 40% of the revenues that we bring in go back out in terms of compensation to our associates. And then these buildings are open 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. They're fully occupied, hopefully, right? That entire time. But to service and maintain these businesses, we rely on a number of different ancillary businesses, everything from snow removal to local food sourcing to HVAC contracts and elevators. We have people from local businesses in our business every day helping us take care of these assets. And if you put that all together into one big pile of impact, it gets surprisingly large. So much so that when you look at some of the numbers on the screen here, they're somewhat staggering. Over $1.5 billion of economic impact just in our greater Portland region. I think the hotel community itself pays the city of Portland over $8.5 million in property taxes, which again is another outflow. It's money that comes in that goes back out into the community. One of the statistics I think is really interesting is the one on the bottom, where for every 139 visitors that comes to stay in the Portland region is a new job. So for us, that's a fairly significant when you think about a hotel on any given year will have at least 20,000 visitors inside that single hotel. And if you do the math on and on and on, these numbers start to take on a real context.
Does the numbers go up, more visitors, more jobs?
That's the connection I certainly make, and I think that's absolutely true. I don't know how you could argue with that logic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And Jim, let me ask you a question. Do these benefits just stay in Portland area, or do they ripple all over the place?
Well, I think they really ripple all over the local community and the local economy, as evidenced by a lot of the subcontractors or trades that are utilized. And of course, our employees are locals. They don't commute from too far away. And so a largest expenditure, as John was saying, is in human resources. And those are all locals that fit right back into the economy. And I'm going to just touch on one other thing on that front, is that oftentimes people think about, oh, it's a Hilton or it's a Marriott, it's some big corporate giant in Washington, D.C. Most of the hotels in Portland are developed by and still owned by local real estate entrepreneurs and developers. They pay a franchise fee to a Marriott or a Hilton or a Intercontinental Hotel Group, but they're locally owned, and that money stays in the economy as well.
Let me follow up with you. You've been behind several transformative hotel projects here in Portland, including the Press Hotel, the Canopy Hotel, and you have a new project, I believe, at 465 Congress Street in Monument Square. From a developer's perspective, why are investors still confident in Portland?
Well, investors look at numbers at the end of the day, right? I mean, capital flows to where it's treated best. And at the end of the day, capital is looking for a risk-adjusted return. And so far, over the last, I've been here for 25 years. I moved here just a year before John did. We've seen a significant change, an increase in the demand in Portland for hotel rooms. And with that increase in demand, we've had supply pretty much mimicking that. And so, at the end of the day, it comes down to, Can an investor put capital in a project and expect to get back a reasonable return based upon that risk? And so Portland continues to grow. Obviously, we worry about an oversupply at some stage. I think I'm supposed to flick a slide here.
You have a great graph. I didn't want everybody to miss
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, you do.
There we go.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, so this is going back 15 years, and just to kind of keep it really simple, the top line is the amount of supply that's been added to the marketplace over that 15 years, and the bottom graph is the demand in the marketplace. And so you'll see that there's the really quick, easy one is in 2020 when COVID hit. A lot of hotels shut down, which is why the supply obviously even dips right there, kind of a COVID. But look at what happened after COVID. The market really rebounded. A lot of people wanted to come to a drive-to destination. And then from there, it's really tapered off. But as you see, it's an upward trend. The demand and the supply, those lines are darn close to parallel to each other. So even though we start seeing a new hotel added to our marketplace virtually every year in the greater Portland marketplace, we've seen approximately 120 rooms on average being added every single year. The demand continues to stay with that pace. There is a lot of new hotel supply that's currently proposed in the market, and we're going to talk about a little bit of that. I don't know if all of it will happen, and we're going to get to a slide in a moment about historic, and I'll show you one of the projects that we're working on. But as many of you know, the City of Portland enacted a moratorium against hotels. A number of hotels got their approvals prior to that moratorium taking place. I think there's something like 10 projects that are in the pipeline or approved at this stage. I think my personal opinion is construction price being what they are right now, I think a lot of them will be a bit challenged to get the numbers to work out. I mean, you can't hold these hotels together with bubble gum, and as we saw in the paper today, bubble gum was up 8.1% last year. And I can tell you what, construction costs is a lot more than that. I continue to be shocked at what's happened in construction, and of course that's hurting the ability for building more housing as well as hotels and other things here in Portland.
What do you think? Oh, go ahead.
I want to jump in on that really quick. You know, the other thing about the viability of hospitality and hotel development in Portland isn't simply just the summer travel that I think everybody just immediately jumps to when they think about why people come to Maine. Our region is also, you know, sort of home to all of the really major corporate demand drivers that support our community. So when we build hotels, everybody says, oh, you know, summer you're going to do really well. We do a lot of campus hospitality. Oh, you'll go football games and graduations. And my first reply is, well, what about Tuesday in January? So we have to fill, you know, upwards of 100 to 150 rooms for the business to be viable throughout the year. And that includes January, February, and March. It includes Monday and Tuesday, not just Friday and Saturday. And the Portland marketplace supports hotels 12 months a year, not just 4. In some seasonal properties, we make 80% of our bottom line in just a couple of months. But here we really can't rely on that. We have to have enough visitors, enough visitorship and travel to Portland the entire year. And so for Portland to be able to sustain that, it goes beyond just the leisure traveler. It's the corporate traveler, it's the hospital patient and family, it's the student, it's the person just going down 295 on their way to other parts of the state.
You touched upon exactly what I was going to ask you, is food and culture isn't the only driver. And you're seeing more businesses come to the area now and want to have their conferences here in Portland. Is that a fair statement?
We're starting to see a rebound of that. The corporate travel obviously plummeted right after COVID, and really the transient market, the tourist transient, is what survived or brought the hotel market back post-COVID. But we are starting to see a return to that, but I don't think we're really quite back to the heydays of 2019 with regard to business travel and conferences. And of course, we don't have a huge conference center here in Portland or in this greater Portland area. And that's been a whole nother debate over the years is, you know, should we build a real conference facility here in Portland? And that's a whole nother issue to get into.
Yeah, we could do a whole other eggs and issues
Yeah.
on the convention center in Portland.
But John brought up a really good point, is most people don't think about this. The demand curve is kind of like a camel in the summertime. You know, we have way more demand than we do rooms in the summertime, but in that off season, in the wintertime, we're all struggling. And so you don't build the church for Easter Sunday per se, and so we're not building hotels just for that summer. What we really need to be focusing on in a region is how do we try to bring up the ends of that camel, if you will, in that wintertime. And so looking at business transient, events, meetings, and we've really benefited in Portland with the foodie culture you've talked about.
Yeah.
People love to drive from a place like Boston, which is our major market. It's the #1 market for Portland, Maine, is Boston area, to come up for a weekend and hit the breweries, hit the restaurants, go to the art gallery, all those kind of things. But I'm really excited about some of the demand generators that I hope will continue to be more year-round, such as the Rue Institute coming here and creating a new educational graduate program. I'm on the board of University of New England. We just made a significant investment in our health sciences here on the Portland campus. You've got the Portland Museum of Art doing a huge expansion. So those are the kind of things that I hope will help even out that camel curve, if you will, and create some demand in the off-season as well.
Perfect time to bring in Matt. Matt, you study hotel markets nationally. What are the key indicators you look at when assessing whether a city can sustain more hotel investment? And I would imagine there are things like occupancy, revenue per available room, supply pipelines, tourism growth. So where does Portland stand compared to other cities?
Thanks, Rob. So I've got a great graph. I'm glad you asked that question. There we go. So actually, I went a little above and beyond because, and before I even get into these graphs, I always try to remind people whenever I present data, there's a famous quote about how there's 3 types of lies: damn lies, and statistics. And I'm about to give you a bunch of statistics. I've tried to make them as honest as possible. But you could really play with these numbers, particularly when you start looking at things like rooms per capita, right? Like what room area are you talking about? What geographic area? So I looked at MSAs, Metropolitan Statistical Areas, to look at rooms per capita, just because I thought it was interesting. I know that wasn't the question that you asked, but it's something that was interesting to me, particularly when you consider the title, right? Like, do we seriously another hotel? Well, I was interested, how do we stack up? This is not a statistic that any developer ever looks at when they're trying to decide whether or not to build a hotel. To me, it's more just interesting. And you can see here that we really don't have, on a per capita basis, we really do not have a whole ton of rooms compared to places like, oddly, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Savannah, Georgia is a more tourist destination. Where you see a really huge spike is when you look at markets like Newport, Rhode Island, or Saratoga, New York, where you've got really heavy tourists. Orlando, Las Vegas would be sort of the big ones in that area. So what's interesting to me is that this does not suggest that we're really out of balance, right? In those markets, you can get out of balance in terms of having too many rooms. And we were joking earlier about, the whole notion of, some markets are under-demolished. They're not oversupplied. They're just under-demolished because the product is old and tired, and there's an opportunity for new product. But anyway, the other slide here, the comparable market performance really sort of goes to the root of your question, Rob, which is about, and you can see here, Portland, these are, what the statistics that we look at when we're evaluating a market are occupancy, rate, and then RevPAR, which is the culmination. It's the combination. If you multiply occupancy times rate, you get RevPAR, which is revenues per available room. And you can see here that the green line is the occupancy, and the blue line is average rate, and the red bar is RevPAR. And you can see that Portland is the leader in terms of average daily rate, but not in terms of occupancy. And Portland's average rate is over $200, around $217. And so that means that's on average for every hotel in the market, the average daily rate they're getting is $217, which is significantly higher.
I was just going to touch on that because I think most people, I'm thinking most people in the room are shocked at that because you've probably had a friend come to town and say, I can't believe it. I looked for a hotel on Friday night and it's $500 dollars. And so that gets back to what John talked about. We've got to fill that room in January. And so the stats that Matt's given you are on an annualized basis, 365 of all the product from the economy to the luxury sector. And it isn't a particularly high number when you start hearing from your friends that come to visit here in the summertime, and some of them are paying $1,000 a night for room in a peak season.
Right. Right, yeah, and this is really all of the product, right? You know, so you've got properties downtown that have much higher average daily rates than this. But again, what I'm looking at here is the comparison, right? So Portland relative to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Burlington, Vermont. You know, these are, you know, comparable regional markets in terms of size, demand patterns, and the like, particularly Burlington. And then when you look at this, if I'm a hotel developer, this is pretty good. I mean, it used to be sort of the general threshold when you were looking, if you're evaluating a market, like, should I build there? You know, the general threshold was, well, if the market's at 70%, then I'll take a look. If it's under 60, under 70, you know, 60, you know, even more, you know. But then you do have to factor in average rate, right? So if you've got supply constraints and it's hard to build new hotels, you might be able to get a really strong average rate, which will help. But in general, the rule of thumb was 70% at around $150. Now there's all kinds of different metrics. It varies depending on the product, right? You know, you can build you know, these new extended stay products that offer very little in the way of services, and therefore, and in terms of housekeeping and whatnot, and they're more profitable. So that changes the economic dynamic a little bit. But anyway, you can see all three of these markets have a lot of supply proposed. Portland is probably the most popular market of the three. Burlington is struggling a bit right now. You know, we were talking earlier, they've had some real challenges in Burlington in terms of their reputation for safety in particular, which is something you know, that we're all very aware of and watching carefully in Portland.
Is it fair to say, looking at that graph, we are not overbuilt?
No, I mean, you can see that. I mean, we're cranking. We're at 70. That occupancy level is about 73% with an average rate of 217. So that does not suggest an overbuilt market at all. You know, when you see an overbuilt, often theoretically, right, there's supply and demand, and you're going to have this dip. And you know, it's amazing the resilience of the Portland market. In 2013, I was looking at the market. And when Jim was trying to build the Press Hotel, the Courtyard was opening and the Hyatt Place was opening. The Westin had rooms out of order. We saw on the peninsula there was a 50% increase in supply. We went from 1,200 rooms to 800 rooms in the course of basically the course of a year, roughly. And everybody was saying to me, you know, what do you think is going to happen? And I was like, it's going to be a train wreck. You know, like, you know, we were expecting like a 10% drop in occupancy. Like, the market just can't support that kind of growth. And of course, I was totally wrong. The market bounced right back, and you know, RevPAR grew, you know, like by 30% in the following years. It just absorbed all of that new demand. And you know, to John's point about the diversity of demand, it was, you know, a lot of different factors.
Yeah, can I jump on that point again?
Please.
Because one of the things in terms of, we're looking at occupancies, we're looking at rates for market viability, but we're also trying to understand what the downside risk is. And so we start looking at some of the contextual elements: accessibility, diversity of demand. Do you have all of your eggs in one demand basket? Yeah. Or, you know, is there, in a place like Burlington, for instance, attractive because it's university, corporate, leisure? There's a lot of reasons. So if one's down, the other one might not be down. Accessibility, airport, availability of workforce, so on and so forth. You know, having worked together for the last 20 years, one of the things that's really interesting about Portland is that, you know, we've had some significant economic events. If it's 9/11 and sort of the 2001 recession, fast forward to the recession, and then even COVID most recently, what happens interestingly in Maine is that there's always going to be sort of troughs and peaks in market performance. But our troughs are always a lot shallower than other marketplaces. In times of sort of economic stress, people are more likely to get in their cars and drive up 95 and vacation in Maine, because we talk to a huge population base in the Northeast, and this is still vacation land and a place that people want to go, and we do have demand diversity. And so I think those things all sort of go into the calculus that investors make. Another interesting thing in terms of development is also hotels are bought and sold all the time. And what you do see is that investors who are looking for great lodging opportunities in the real estate space are buying hotels in Portland as well, because they too see that they're sort of, you talked about risk-adjusted returns, the risks are relatively low compared to other markets you want to be in. This goes for like the La Quinta recently, the Clarion here in our own backyard. I think the Residence Inn in Scarborough is now also for sale.
You know, a lot of people were talking about the Canadian effect that was going to happen this summer, and it didn't happen, right? Portland occupancy was up.
Yeah.
But look at that occupancy curve there, Burlington on the right. The Burlington market, because we've been following that, we're going to be managing a hotel that opens there next summer in Winooski. And that market has plummeted this year because the lack of Canadian tourists coming across the border. So there again is the diversity, the lack of diversity, if you will, in that market was heavily driven by Canadian tourists.
Yeah, they got whacked, and we got whacked in June, if I remember. July and August really came around, but May and June were tough, and some of it's weather. I mean, there's so many different factors.
Right. John, we all know hospitality is people-powered. What challenges are hotels facing in finding and retaining staff in Portland today?
To be really frank, I don't think there is the sort of the workforce landscape is as challenging as people may think it is. It was very challenging in COVID. People just left the workforce. But as an operator of hotels across the nation, but here in our own backyard, we are thankfully feeling pretty good about filling the positions that we have available. There's a lot of different positions in a hotel. It's not really just, you know, sort of front desk, so to speak, but we have administrative positions, culinary, laundry, housekeeping. So there's a sort of a job for anybody and everybody in a hotel. Another, I think, sort of maybe something that's a misunderstood element is that our jobs actually pay rather well. And so they're in somewhat high demand. And then obviously we like to focus, and I think hotels are very culturally driven because we spend so much time and energy making sure that we're creating a culture of hospitality for our travelers and our visitors. We also try to focus on a culture of hospitality for our staff because retaining staff is sort of a critical element of long-term success. And so when you sort of combine that, you know, workforce culture, hotel culture with wages, availability of parking, you know, the challenges have been pretty easy to overcome really since COVID. That being said, that's always going to be, you know, sort of a constant challenge of finding the best and the brightest. One thing that definitely has changed over the years is the experience level of people we bring into the hotels. A lot of times, you know, we're bringing in people with no hotel experience nowadays. And so we have to invest time and resources in training and development. That's a good thing for us because I think one of the great things about the hospitality industry is that people can enter at the beginning level and they can enjoy a career trajectory that takes them all the way up to hotel leadership and then above property leadership without higher education because you can develop the skills and abilities while you're in the space.
Yeah, I think, you know, hospitality, I spent a lot of time with the AHLA, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, and, you know, there's a real push now to drive this, you know, or eliminate this sort of stigma of, you know, you want fries with that? You know, this derision of hospitality. And because I think it's, I mean, I started, you know, I was washing pots and pans when I was 12, like illegally, and then worked my way up, you know, and, you know, if it weren't for that, like, you know, who knows what my career would look like. And there are, you know, so many other stories like that. You know, you can really exceed and excel without a college degree even in this industry. And, you know, I think it's a shame that there isn't a, you know, more appreciation for the culture and for the industry, the way there is in Europe, for example, right, or in Asia, where it's considered a profession and it, you know, has a much more sort of honorable perception.
Well, that said, you're still not paying $15.50 an hour, I would imagine.
No, I think that the Maine Office of Tourism did a report that showed that the average hourly wage earner in the hospitality industry in Maine makes $21.74 an hour, I believe. Wow. And the average salaried employee at a hotel makes almost $75,000 a year. So that stat goes to show that there are good jobs in the hospitality industry.
And a lot of them.
And a lot of them. I mean, we operate 3 hotels in Portland, the Weldon, the Press Hotel, and the Canopy. And we've got nearly 200 employees here in downtown Portland. So it's definitely a business that drives a lot of employment.
How does that compare to other regions you operate in?
I would say it's similar. A lot of the number of employees per hotel has a lot to do with what type of hotel it is, whether it's a limited service, which in essence means you get like a little continental breakfast, or if it's a full service, which the Press Hotel and the Canopy are, that have full, 3-meal-a-day food and beverage operations, versus a limited, Matt mentioned extended stay, where there's a very low staffing level. Typically, rooms aren't cleaned every day. The room, cleaned every 3 days or when a guest checks out. So it greatly depends on the type of brand. But I think it's safe to say in a full-service hotel, there's probably something like 7 employees for every 10 guest rooms or something like that. That's about what our ratio is.
Is technology changing those staffing models at all?
It's a great question, and I don't think, people are always asking me, what's going to happen with AI, and I wish I knew the answer to that. But nonetheless, I think AI is definitely helping us from a technology perspective to be more efficient. But, somebody's still got to go clean the room. Somebody's got to cook the eggs. Somebody's got to serve the drink. Somebody's got to check them in. Maybe some of those check-in functions start to become a little more technology-oriented. They are moving that way. But I don't think that there's going to be a dramatic decrease in employment. I think there's going to be a shift in the employment, and I think there's going to be a drive towards efficiency that's going to be driven by AI and technology.
Yeah, the technology thing's not new. I remember going back to the Hilton Garden Inn back in like 2005. People invented kiosks, so you could skip the front desk and go to a terminal, put in your reservation, and it would spit out your key, and you could bypass the front desk. And we're like, well, that's just great. It's new technology. Maybe we'll save payroll. Let's invest $25,000 in buying one of these things, and nobody used it. And the reason nobody used it is that people like to go to the front desk. They want the recommendation. They have questions about their stay, their rooms, what to do, where to go, where to eat. AI can replace some of that, but at the end of the day in hotels, the personal connection is always going to be a cornerstone of the experience, and AI will never be able to make a bed with tight corners or cook an omelet. So,
right. Right. And our hotels are very experiential. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying. We're trying to create a really unique experience that our guest enjoys their time in Portland, Maine. And that face-to-face touch point it can't be replicated. And so, we're trying to create this unique experience and get them to come back again. And so I think the human side of that, it can't be beat.
Totally agree. Jim, let me also ask you, Portland takes its historic character pretty seriously, and yet we see significant new development. You've led projects that have woven preservation into hotel design. How do you balance growth with protecting Portland's history?
Well, as many of you know, I was responsible for the Press Hotel here in town back in 2014, I guess, when we opened, where we took the former Portland Press-Herald newspaper building that was a printing and office building and was able to do a historic rehabilitation or adaptive reuse to become the Press Hotel. People tend to love that product. Using these historic buildings allows you to kind of tie to the past history of that building and something unique and tell the story and create that experience for our guests. You've got the Regency Hotel here on the slide as well, which was an old armory turned into an independent boutique hotel. The Press Hotel is a Marriott Autograph. Again, we're a franchisee. We operate that hotel, even though we did sell it to a large private equity group a few years ago. So the downtown Portland has a fair amount of historic buildings. While it's more challenging to permit and get through the approval process on historic, there are some incentives, and most of these projects wouldn't happen without some of the incentives, specifically the federal and the state historic tax credits, which generate 45 cents of credits per dollar spent on construction of that building during the rehabilitation. So project like the Press Hotel or the one that we're starting to work on now, which is the former Maine Bank and Trust building, which was originally built in 1910 for Fidelity. There's another group working on the Time and Temp building, trying to turn both of these kind of historic landmark buildings in downtown Portland, right at Monument Square, into thriving new hotels that will hopefully add a lot to the city of Portland. So it's challenging, but I love working with the historic buildings. I've done several historic tax credit projects here in Maine and really enjoy that aspect of it. And I think it ends up creating a really unique product at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's, sorry, I'm working on a project with East Brown Cow on the Docents Collection, which is the rehab, it's taking the old Class B office space above the retail in the heart of the Old Port and turning that into units that can be rented to guests. And it's a total win-win, right? The guests love it because of the historic nature. They're in the heart of everything. And we love it because the guests love it, right? So it's really, it works out well. And it preserves those buildings, right? They're occupied and generating revenue, generating taxes for the community and giving back. So.
Right, they're catalytic too. These are buildings that are in a state of decay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, these were kind of, nothing against Tim Solly's buildings, but those were kind of Class B office buildings at the time.
Right.
And now he's spent an enormous amount of capital bringing those buildings up to speed. And I mean, if you've been driven by this Docent collection on Middle Street, the facades of these buildings have been brought back to beautiful life again. And I think it's fabulous for downtown Portland.
It's funny, you read in the paper a hotel moratorium, but these are approved, right?
That's a great point. There are a number of hotels that are already approved, including both of these here on the slide that are mentioned. I think Matt was telling me that the old train station building over on St. John, as well as the Docent collection.
Thompson's Point.
Thompson's Point has a new development going on. So there's quite a few projects that are approved that applied to the city of Portland prior to the moratorium being put in place. And not to get too into the policies of inclusionary zoning, but in essence, the city council, when decided that they felt that the inclusionary zoning fee for hotels was too low in comparison to the inclusionary zoning fee on residences. And so there's a hope that the inclusionary zoning fee might come back down on residential, that you don't have to provide 25% of the units. There was roughly a $4,500 price per key that need to be paid to the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund for every hotel room that got built in the city of Portland. And they're debating right now, do they raise that or not? It's still in committee.
Double, right?
There's talk of doing a lot more than tripling or quadrupling.
Yeah, what scares me, going back to my thing about lies, damn lies, and statistics, so I went through the analysis used for the inclusionary zoning that they used, and like the assumptions in there were crazy, right? Like $14 an hour, nobody pays $14 an hour,
Well, minimum wage is
Below minimum
Right,
wage.
right,
Yeah, but their report said that.
Yeah, they assumed construction costs of $250 a square foot. I mean, you can't build a shed for $250 a square foot.
Yeah. No, I mean, to give you an idea, construction cost on a historic building, this is what's crazy to me from a historic perspective. But the Fidelity Trust building here that we're working on, the foundation's in, the structure's there, the stone facade is in place. We're not doing a lot of structural work to it. That building is almost $450 a square foot to renovate, just the hard construction costs. Not forgetting, furnishings, operating supplies, technology, all those other things, or building acquisition costs. Just the hard construction costs is almost $500 a square foot.
And that's low. I'm seeing numbers much higher than that for new ground-up construction. I mean,
Yeah, that's why these projects wouldn't happen without historic tax credits, and even with that, frankly, they're a challenge. That's why the time and temp has been sitting empty for more than a decade. Right. I'm hopeful that project can come back to life again. I think if both of these projects happen, I think a lot of the challenges that are being seen along Congress Street and Monument Square will help turn around. That's one of the things that the revitalization of these historic buildings does to these downtown neighborhoods, is it brings life and energy. The guests that walk out of these hotels that are paying more than $200 a night on average, they have money. And they're walking down the street to go to a bar, or they're walking to the art gallery, they're walking to the coffee shop. So that tends to bring back retail and revitalize communities again. And that, putting people in the streets, makes streets safer. The challenge we have is we need to make the streets safe enough that people want to go out on them in the first place.
Right.
That's the real challenge we're dealing with.
That's the cure for all those vacant storefronts on Congress Street.
Yeah.
That was last month's Eggs and Issue. But even with that supply pipeline, we still aren't putting a dent in what we need for the future growth. Is that correct?
if all the projects that are currently planned were to get their financing and get built, I'm very worried about an oversupply in the marketplace.
You are.
There's a lot of hotel rooms proposed. That kind of graph that I showed you, if you put all the projects that are approved and assume they happen in the next 24 to 36 months, it would be a dramatic change in supply in this marketplace. And I think the way business works is the market will see that, and likely the latter ones of those won't get financing. They won't get the equity, or they won't get the bank debt. I mean, Matt talked about the huge supply growth that happened between 2013 and 2014, when the Courtyard and the Hyatt were about 6 months ahead of me on the Press Hotel. And no mention of any bank's names, but I had a bank that basically said, you know what? I'm sorry, Jim, we're not going to fund the Press Hotel because we're convinced that this market cannot absorb another hotel. And we're involved in one of these other hotels. There's 2 new hotels coming to the market. I had to go to an out-of-state bank to get that project financed. Fortunately, that bank has come back and said, gosh, we didn't see that.
Yeah. I hope you invited them to dinner at the Press Hotel.
Well, to go to the sort of the headline of this session, seriously another hotel, a tremendous amount of evaluation and underwriting goes into every hotel project. And there's always the question whether or not the next hotel to Portland is going to tip the scales to a saturated market. Matt told a story about 2013, 14, 15, and everybody thought that was the moment when the hotel marketplace here in Portland was going to have too many rooms and we were going to see declining performance. And quite honestly, it just simply hasn't happened. Even as recently as 2021 and 22, real estate investment groups were buying into this marketplace because they believed in the durability of our performance. All of the future hotels that are sort of on the docket will go through rigorous underwriting. Nobody wants to invest millions and millions of dollars in a project or loan a project even more than that for a project that has prospects of failure. So all of that for me is evidence of how people feel about this marketplace, both based on its historic performance and based on the projections of growth. And so my sort of sermon would be, if all of these risk-minded individuals see a future in Maine development, particularly in hospitality, that you should trust it to a certain degree because lots of people have done the math.
Well, and let them come. What's the worst that happens? The market drops to 65%. It's still good for the broader economy, right?
Yeah.
So
you may have some developers that are having a tough time with debt service coverage.
right.
Well, I think you've proven the case too that hotels are tying into Portland's long-term prosperity, right? So all of these drivers that we looked at are proof that the more people we bring to Portland, the more jobs we'll have, the more revenue we'll create. I think it says itself. It speaks for itself, really.
Well, and I think you do want sort of looking at supply and demand. From a numbers perspective, you don't want occupancy to get too high, right? And so if you don't have the new supply, occupancy will grow, and then average rates will continue to grow to a point where they're not affordable. And then that makes it less attractive to small businesses, for example, right? Like, well, I would love to have you come visit me at my office in Portland, Maine, but it's $700 a night, and I can't afford that. So I'm an advocate of letting the market tell the story.
So if you had a crystal ball, what's the right balance between hotels, housing, and other industries in Portland's downtown in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think we all know that we've got a housing crisis going on, not just here in Maine, not just in Portland, but across the country. The state of Maine says we need 80,000 new housing units.
By 2030.
By 2030. Mm-hmm. So pretty short timeline, and I don't think we're anywhere near on track doing that. I think the high construction cost is making that very challenging. And in downtown Portland, I honestly think the inclusionary zoning's made it very challenging for projects to pencil out and for developers to be able to add supply, which is why you're starting to see new supply coming into places like Westbrook and Saco Biddeford and Gorham and places like that because they don't have that. So I think that it is critical for us to have housing on a lot of fronts. How many of you have businesses out here that are struggling to attract employees or team members to come move to this market because they can't find affordable housing? And I don't mean affordable with a capital A, I mean regular workforce style housing that's not deed restricted at low income area. And that's really what's being built mostly in Portland is low-income housing because they benefit from the low-income housing tax credit. So those tend to be, they pencil better than a private market rate project. So our employees, our team members, they need places to live. And so we do need to build housing. And I'm hoping that the city makes some changes to some of the policies that I think are driving housing out of the city.
Okay, I think it's time to take some questions from the audience now.
Dick Fleming, recent new resident of Portland, moved here from St. Louis about a year ago. And I want to come to the Camel and Convention Center issue and mixed-use development and placemaking in downtown. The panel last session talked about what it takes to reinvent downtown. Frankly, coming here from St. Louis, I feel like I died and went to heaven in terms of the fabric of downtown Portland. Right. But I know it needs help. Even the communities that were up on the board, Savannah and Charleston, I believe, have convention conference centers to complement their historic use. Why do we not have that here, and what would it take to complement the tourism with a convention market-driven economy for the hotel community?
I wish we could change the weather, because that's a big one. So what happens is that, talking about the Camel Hump, this sort of convention center conversation's always been hamstrung by when conventioneers want to come to our marketplace is when it's least affordable, because we have such a robust leisure demand in season. And what happens is then you hope that you can use a convention center to augment visitation on the shoulder seasons, but in the winter, like people just simply, quite honestly, just don't think of coming to Portland, Maine, once the leaves fall. And they don't think about coming back until early June. And so there's always been a little bit of a disconnect from when people want to be here, and we just, quite honestly, we don't even have enough hotel inventory today to accommodate conventions of 10 to 15,000 visitors.
Right.
And so we have an inventory problem. We have a conflict with when leisure travelers want to be here and when conventioneers want to plan. And then, we just sort of, we live in a very seasonal environment, unfortunately.
Minneapolis figured that out?
Well, they have, it's a much larger MSA, obviously, and they do have this, and then they have obviously covered walkways connecting the entire city. So, Chicago goes through the same thing, though. If you try to buy a hotel room in Chicago inside the Loop in, June, it's $400, but you can stay in downtown Chicago for $110, at a 3 or 4 diamond asset. So they have sort of the same problems, but I think the scale of those markets is just so much bigger. People also, oftentimes when I travel, well, Portland, Maine, it's like the headquarters of Maine. I'm like, yeah, but there's only 70,000 people in our MSA. It's actually a really, really small marketplace. And so I think that disconnect pops up in that conversation quite a bit.
I mean, we could have, I think Matt said, we could have an eggs and issues about the conference center. I think one of the challenges too is it does typically require pretty significant government subsidy to make it work, and there hasn't been an appetite in Portland to do that. Way back in 2000, I think the Libra Foundation proposed helping the city do that, and down in the Bayside area, and it was rejected. And since then, there really hasn't been a lot of support from a financial perspective or a government subsidy that would be required to build a facility like that.
Yeah, they're almost always led by the government, and usually often it's one individual, right? Like in Boston, Mayor Menino drove the BCEC. He carried that on his back, and Nashville, I can't remember who the mayor there was. Atlanta, they're all driven by political will to do it because it's a political football, right? Because you're investing, you need to build a convention center, but then you have to have a headquarters hotel built next to it, which is not economically viable. So the government needs to subsidize that hotel in some manner. So there are winners and losers, and it gets really dicey.
Some of you in this audience maybe remember Joe Bolus proposed a convention center on the top of the Old Port parking lot right there on Congress and Franklin And to be able to finance that project, they needed a local option sales tax to pass. Baldacci was the governor at the time, and it didn't pass the state legislature to pass a local option sales tax, which was going to fund the financing of that new center. So
We're also at a crossroads in general in our industry about large group in general. A lot of the secondary and tertiary convention centers are empty, a lot, and the long-term prospects for sort of mega group gathering is still a question mark. We've seen it return in some of the primary destinations like Boston and Chicago, but whether or not any convention center is sustainable given how people convene today, they just convene in smaller numbers and a lot less frequently than they used to. So I think there's a lot of doubt out there about the long-term viability of the convention market.
Rachel?
other questions?
Thank you, Josh with Maine Bankers. Excited to hear about the optimism and growth potential, but it does feel like the state and the city are becoming increasingly concentrated in hospitality and in tourism particularly, not just the business travel, but overly concentrated in hospitality for leisure. I think that concern about too many eggs in that basket is something we're going to have to wrestle with as a state. How do you react to that when you're looking at the future? Thank you.
I mean, I guess at a high level, I would agree with you that we need a diverse economy. That's what John talked to before. You know, things like the cruise ship industry, who puts a fair number of passengers, particularly down Commercial Street in the summer, and actually more so in the fall these days. A lot of the locals don't like that many people in the streets. There's a lot of pushback against the cruise ships for a number of different reasons. One of the things I like about it is I have found that anecdotally, a lot of people that come and stay in our hotels had never been to Portland, Maine before they took a cruise ship here 3 to 5 years ago and said, wow, that's a beautiful place. We stopped for 6 hours and I walked around the old port, these beautiful cobblestone red brick sidewalks, and we want to come back. So, I do think we need some diversity. I would love to see businesses come back. It's one of the reasons I highlighted things like the Rue Institute, who I think will help create new jobs and new companies here. What University of New England's doing, what Portland Museum of Art is doing. Those things are helping to draw people here that aren't just tourism. They're creating jobs, and that's really what we need. We need more jobs and to drive our economy here.
Yeah, admittedly, our state is vacation land, has been for the longest of times, and I think it will continue to be that. And I think that diversification is a great concept and it's necessary, but at the end of the day, I think part of our economic identity will always be rooted in travel and tourism. And I think for that reason, there will always be interest in investing in those businesses. And as old product ages out, new product will replace it, but I believe people always want to come here.
I think we have a question over here.
Hello, I'm Sarah with the Portland Museum of Art. Thank you for the shout out about what we are doing for the community. I was curious what future hotel development with the regulated operations and economic stability is up against. I personally am not a fan of Airbnbs, and with them and Vrbo coming in so prevalently, and they seem to negatively affect the residency opportunities in Cumberland County housing market. How can we help encourage hotels and what you give to the economy and discourage a bit of Airbnbs?
Can you say the last part a little bit? I'm sorry, we were having
Yeah,
a hard time
sorry, I'm
hearing
very
you.
nervous.
Just the last question part of it?
I'm just wondering how we can encourage more hotel development because it does give so much economic stability and create jobs.
Yep.
And allow people to afford to live in Portland instead of the growth of Airbnb and Vrbo.
The Airbnb question.
Sorry.
Good question.
You got that one, Matt.
I get all the fun stuff. Well, so it's interesting. New York just banned Airbnb, and they did a statistic, they call it short-term rental, or STR is the term. And it was a real boon for the hotel industry. So as a hotelier, I'm all for it. It did not affect rent or housing in New York, and I think they looked at a couple of other cities. I thought that was pretty interesting, that trend. So from that sense, yeah, I mean, the short-term rental market is driven by, is impacted by regulation, right? It isn't impacted necessarily by the market. It's more driven by regulation in terms of putting the brakes on it or clamping down. So,
Yeah, I think there's been a pretty good correlation to, short-term rentals oftentimes can drive people out of housing. Somebody had a triple-decker on Munjo Hill, and maybe they had 3 long-term tenants on those 3 floors, and now they've decided maybe they'll live in one and rent the other one to an Airbnb and generate a higher net operating income at the end of the year. And so the city of Portland, to Matt's point, has put restrictions in place on the number of short-term rentals or STRs, which I think is a positive, not just from a hotel perspective, but I think it can drive people out of housing. So I'm for restrictions on short-term rentals.
Yeah, I mean, private developers were buying housing stocks strictly to make it Airbnb inventory. To the extent that regulation can reverse that opportunity, I think it's good for prospective tenants who need housing, but it's also good for hoteliers as well.
Good. Well, thank you all for joining us, and a sincere thank you to Matt, Jim, and John for joining us this morning. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Reminder for everybody, this event has been recorded and will be available on the Chamber's YouTube channel. We also ask you, while you're there, stay up to date at portlandregion.com. You can sign up for the Chamber's Advocacy and Events newsletter. And we'll see you back here next month on November 6th for Stuck, Why Portland Has Stopped Building. We look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye. Thank you.